actually have a bonus question.
Great. I
You
love
may
bonus questions.
either love me or hate me for asking this question.
Great. I love a polarizing bonus question.
Yes. How do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Oh, geez. Practice, practice, practice.
Content warnings for this episode include dysphoria, mental health, and ableism.
Genderful would like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples and unceded lands that the producers, hosts, and guests live and have dwelt upon. Today we honor the
Coast Salish,
the Mohawk, Algonquin, and Anishinabewaki,
The Susquehannock, Muscogee, Kickapoo, Seminole, Chumash, Tongva, and Kizh.
We honor the elders, the human, plant, and animal ancestors of these lands, and celebrate the living descendants of these peoples. May all beings tend these lands for the goodness for the next 7 generations and beyond.
Meowdy folks, welcome to Genderful, a talk show interviewing gender diverse folks about their special interests.
The name of our show celebrates that gender expansiveness is wonderful.
Hi, I'm GenderMeowster, and my pronouns are they, them.
Hi, I'm Atlas of Phoenix, and my pronouns are also they, them. The focus of our show is to interview trans, non-binary, agender, and gender-diverse people regarding their special interests, passion projects, and resources for the gender-diverse community.
We want our audience to know that this show is hosted by 2 folks who also identify as non-binary, transmasculine, neurodivergent, and disabled, with the passion for telling trans stories.
We invite you to remember that we are whole people with robust lives, friendships, challenges, and successes. We love and are loved, and we are delighted to share these stories with you.
As always, we kindly remind our listeners that no person is a monolith of their identities. Your identities can change over time and are valid every step of the way. And if you think you're gender diverse, you are gender diverse. There are no social or medical prerequisites to be included in the community. Welcome to Genderful, episode 92. My goodness, y'all. This week, our guest, Stevie J. Hirner, she, her pronouns, is chatting with us about gender inclusivity in choir. I actually heard about you, Stevie, through my choir director in high school. I reached out to her on Facebook like a decade later and was like, trans, voice is dropping, used to be a soprano one. I still want to sing, but I don't know what my voice is doing anymore. What's happening? And she actually had just heard about you at a conference and sent me your website and was like, you should reach out to Stevie. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I've been like excited fist waving over here about having you on the show. So thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited. Is your old choir director someone that I might know, or was it just she saw my name?
Danielle Warner.
Who?
Danielle Warner.
No. Look at that.
Yeah,
people who don't know me know me. Or people who I don't know me. That's so weird.
Yeah. It's all part of being famous.
She's a collegiate level choir director and has been for probably a decade.
Amazing. What school does she teach at? Do you know?
I can't remember. She's moved around a few times. She was in Oregon for a while, and I don't know if she still is.
Aha. Okay.
Yeah. So I also want to acknowledge another person who's here with me, Miranda, also known as NASATAC. She, her pronouns. Miranda, you are one of my wonderful new co-hosts. Welcome in.
Yes, welcome. This is actually my second episode. We forgot to do this last time.
It's true. We got all excited.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
Miranda, would you like to tell our audience like a 1-minute background on you so that we know who you are and where you're from and stuff?
Yeah, well, boy, I don't know if 1 minute will cover it because I've had an interesting life, but we'll just go over what I'm doing now. So I'm a full-time content creator. I stream on Twitch most days. I'm also a YouTuber, so I usually post a lot of videos about me having fun playing video games. I also do make scripted videos on trans topics. So I have a video where I talk about various experiences in my life that led me to me realizing that I was trans. I call it my trans egg cracking video. And I also have a video where I talk about The Prince, which is Abigail Thorne's play that she directed and starred in. So those are a couple of videos that I'm very, very proud of. But mostly I just kind of make dank jokes and talk about how foul my farts are. So that's so you can catch me at NASATAC both on YouTube and on Twitter.
Awesome. I love that. And if anyone would like to catch us both live in person, join us for Trans Pride Seattle at the end of June. I think it's the 4th Friday of the month. It'll be in Volunteer Park in Seattle, Washington.
Yeah, it's
We'll
on
be
June
at the
23rd.
GenderMeowster booth.
Yes. Yeah, I'm flying out to Seattle for it. I'm very excited. It's my first trip in a long time, and it's my first Pride since coming out. So
Yay!
very much
It's going to
looking
be so
forward to
fun.
it.
It's going to be so fun. Stevie, thank you for your patience while we do a little bonus introductions.
No worries.
Oh man, I'm so excited. So Stevie, we have a couple questions that we like to ask all of our guests just because it's interesting to hear people's stories, because something that Atlas, one of our other co-hosts, says is your story is my survival guide. And so by talking about, how did we get to where we are, we show the path to those trans and gender nonconforming people coming behind us. What might be some of the things that you can trace back to your youth that indicated you might be gender diverse one day?
Oof. Well, I could take probably the whole length of the podcast to talk about that. But I think obviously hindsight is 2020. I didn't fully realize or embrace my gender diversity until like my mid to late 20s. But prior to that, I can remember as young as like 5 or 6. I grew up religious, and I remember praying at night that I would wake up in the body of a girl. For like at least a year, I was actually actively praying for that. But already at that age, I knew that that was a quote unquote weird thing to be thinking, or abnormal, or not socially acceptable, because there was an asterisk to my prayer. I was like, I want to wake up in the body of a girl, but like I'll be the only one that knows. Like everyone else will still look at me and see this version, but like I want to look in the mirror and see a girl. So like it's fascinating to me. I don't know where like that subconscious expectation was already so ingrained, but that's definitely where like my earliest memory of like, oh, something about how I exist is outside of society's expectations. And that continued to evolve into a number of different scenarios where like I never felt really comfortable in like typically hypermasculine spaces. I was also an athlete growing up, and like being in locker rooms or around jocks or whatever, like I never felt super comfortable. Like, and growing up, I was always like, oh, well, this is obviously just because I'm more mature than them and they're just being silly and ridiculous, because teenage boys like, but really, I was uncomfortable because I didn't fit in to that social dynamic. And I didn't know that at the time. I mean, my friends growing up were always girls, and I was like, oh, like girls just like to hang out with me. Like that's cool. Like it wasn't like me connecting dots that being surrounded by femininity is where I was most comfortable. And so that definitely was a very interesting path into eventually discovering like, oh, there's a whole lot more to this. And it just kind of, I don't know, here I am at 33 and a whole new me. I did not mean to rhyme.
Yeah, that's incredibly relatable. Very much like we learn at a very, very young age that like, oh, like this is not something you should talk about. This is something you should be ashamed of, right?
It's so absurd.
Yeah,
like,
because
where does that come from? Who told me that like me feeling like a girl would have been weird enough for me to like know that other people seeing me as a girl would be weird for them? Like at 5 or 6 years old, that is wild to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had similar thoughts at that age as well. And it's even at that age, I kind of internalized that was something to be ashamed of. So like, yeah, that's incredibly, and also like the men's, like the boys' locker room. Oh boy, that was another area. I was like,
I was
no,
like
I'm
in and
being
out as
here.
quick as I can. Like,
No.
listen, I can be chummy like on the field or whatever, but
Yeah.
in the locker room, no, thank you. Like,
Oof.
head to the
I
wall, in and out as quick
refused
as
to
possible.
shower in the boys' locker room. It's
Oh my
like,
God.
nope.
I was at a climbing gym recently with a friend of mine, and I was in the women's locker room at that point, and I was like, one, like, holy cow, this is a completely different environment. Not that that was the first women's locker room, but it never occurred to me, like, I heard the showers running. I was like, it never occurred to me that people actually use the showers in a locker room, because like I was always just in and out as quickly as possible. So I had no idea that like that's something people actually do when they're in an environment that they feel comfortable, which is, again, just a foreign experience.
Yeah, imagine
to me.
being comfortable somewhere.
What? Wild.
So our next question kind of has to deal with like your, kind of overall journey, because, as we well know, it's not kind of like a straight path. It's a long and winding road.
Yeah, very much so.
Can be. So how would you say your relationship to gender has evolved over time?
I would say my relationship to gender is primarily tied to an evolution of my capacity for empathy. The more that I began to understand myself, the more that I was open to understanding and listening to the experiences of others. And inherently, by humbling myself to listen to the experiences of others and to connect with people through their unique experiences that I probably have never actually been a part of that sort of social or cultural sphere, it really opened my eyes in terms of how narrow my focus had been before. And not just my focus, but also my priority or my mindfulness. Because I grew up as a white cishet assuming man, and with that, we weren't like upper class or anything. We were more middle class, but like with that comes a significant amount of privilege. And oh, yay, welcome to LA. Lots of sirens. I don't know if you guys heard that or not, but it came with a significant amount of privilege. And as I have let go of more and more, and eventually almost all of that privilege that I had previously, I'm far more sensitive to the gender inequality that is rampant in our society. And yeah, which is why I've dedicated my whole professional existence to doing something about that, because I feel like I have a unique position in that I wasn't told growing up that I needed to keep my ideas to myself. I wasn't told growing up that I needed to be quiet and just do what I'm told, like so many cis women are. And so I have a little bit of remnant of that bullheadedness to just kind of insert myself when I see something wrong. And I think I'm trying to use that to my advantage now, where it's like, listen, I will speak up if I see something is wrong, and you might look at me and not want instinctually to give me the respect that I deserve because you read me as a woman, but I'm going to demand that respect and I'm going to take it, because, there's no, I've never had to struggle with fighting against that. And so, yeah, now I'm just kind of using that to my advantage going forward, which
I love that so much.
When I was growing up, I had the opposite. I I was bullheaded, and people expected me to be a girl, and they expected me to be different, and I never fit in, like, socially as a female person. Like, I was too, like, determined. I didn't care about clothes and how I looked. That was probably also dysphoria, but, like, I didn't fit in with the girls. All my close friends were guys growing up. Um, yeah. So I relate to that, like, just not fitting in with the script you were handed, and just having more self-determination than that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I distinctly remember when I was really young, like most of my friends were girls until I got to the age where that was no longer appropriate, and had to go hang out with the boys, and I was like,
See, I got to that age and I just kept
yeah,
hanging out with the girls.
yeah.
It was more fun there.
Well, it's more like I started getting excluded from like girls' activities, or it's like, hey, I
Oh
want to do girl stuff,
no.
and it's like, you're a boy, you can't play with us. I'm like, oh, all right.
So let me switch topics a little bit towards gender inclusivity in choral music. Stevie, how did understanding your identity affect any professional decisions that you've made since?
It's affected every decision I've made since. And that I wish that were a hyperbolic statement, but it's not. From the moment, I think I was 26. Yeah, I would have been 26 at the time when I accepted my identity as a trans feminine person. And I started hormones about a little over a year after that realization. But I didn't come out publicly because I was like, I know I have these changes that testosterone is doing to my body that I don't like, that make me extremely uncomfortable. Maybe if I just quietly on my own do something to stop some of those changes, like that'll be enough. And I can continue to live with the privilege that I've had, because in my field as a choir director, it is extremely cis het male dominated. Maybe not so much the het, because it is music, but
forever.
but very cis male dominated, which is knowing the privilege that came with that led to a lot of struggle in terms of wondering, like, okay, if I were to transition, am I going to get a job? Am I going to be as respected? And eventually, after almost 2 years on hormones, I was like, I need to come out publicly. Because I was teaching in Miami at the time, and I was seeing my queer students like looking for some sort of mentor or whatever, and like, so I'm trying to support them through the guise of like, I'm an ally, and they're just reading me as a cishet white man, and I'm like, I know more about this experience than you think I do. And so my development as a mentor with my students evolved into a confidence in me that, like, me embracing my truth could allow me to better facilitate more mentor-mentee relationships going forward, because I would be a more authentic version of myself. And so I ended up deciding, when I started applying for doctoral programs, like, all right, I'm going to go through the application process, and then after I figure out where I'm going to go, I will come out publicly, and I'm going to go into my doctorate as my true identity. And there were a lot of life things that happened in the summer of 2020, as with everybody. I happened to also get divorced in that same window of time, and came out publicly toward the end of June 2020. June 20th, I think, actually is the date, which is in another 8 days, will be my 3-year coming out anniversary.
Wow.
And since you did your trans check-in, I noticed today that I am 5 years, 5 months, and 5 days on HRT.
I love that.
555.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I joked that I can't wait until it's 666 just because.
I was just thinking that.
A year and a day from now.
Yeah,
A month and a day from now.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I'll look out for July 13th, 2024.
Oh, I hope it's a Friday.
That would be amazing. But I came out publicly, and I moved to Los Angeles, started my doctorate, and started publicly embracing my authentic self. And my life has never been the same in all of the ways. Professionally, I'm able to focus my study and my research into a direction that is going to help students and singers like myself, while also serving as, I don't mean this in an egotistical way, but serving as an example and a role model of a trans woman who is in a leadership position in a stereotypical cis male world. And there are a few others doing similar work to me, but the number of trans choral scholars in music is small, unfortunately. And even though the number of gender diverse choral educators is high, the ones who have been fortunate to turn their experiences into an educational opportunity for other people, I'm lucky to be counted among them. And the irony is that had I not come out, and had I stayed living as a man, there's 0% chance I would be having the success that I have, because my platform is a unique one, and it's a niche that needs to be filled and addressed. And if I weren't embracing myself, people would be like, why is this man trying to publish on all of this research? This is not the voice that we need to be hearing. And I'm not sure that there would be another topic that would relate to that existence as a man as closely, that would resonate with as many people. So I'm very lucky in that regard to have been able to take something that I was worried would derail my career and make it my career, which has been unreal.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. You mentioned you had a moment or a season where you were worried about you coming out, basically tanking your opportunities. And something that I've seen happen in my wife's life. I'm married to a trans woman. Her name on the internet is Trans Capybara. Shout out to my wife. So she's a software engineer. And when she came out, she stopped getting promotions. And there was like a good maybe 4 to 6 year period where she got no promotions, when she was getting one every 1 to 2 years when she was a white, straight, cis man.
Wow.
And so it's stark to me, that difference between those two things. Now that the pandemic is not stressing everyone out as much, it's still stressing me out the same amount. But other people are more chill about it, which that's a whole other topic. But now that stuff is quote unquote calming down, I needed to put my objection to that perspective here. Now that that's going on, we're starting to see like she got a bonus this year that's sort of on top of her regular bonus that everyone gets. But it's been interesting to see how her work trajectory in also a male-dominated field was, I don't know if truncated is the right word, but delayed or hindered once she came out. And then some of that might be like current events, just like the pandemic and lockdowns and all of that for 3+ years. But it's been really interesting to see that. So I love that in your case, like the identity piece and the niche piece is really what is setting you apart. That
Yeah,
is
and
really powerful.
I came into the field or this level of the field at a fortuitous time when there is a pivot happening in choral music right now toward eschewing the issues and cis white man dominant music history and leaders, etc., moving toward a conscious effort for diversity, equity, and inclusion, due in no small part to the Black Lives Matter movement and decolonization movement and everything that is just kind of deconstructing what is considered quote unquote high art music. At least in my field, if not just in society in general, what is considered like valuable. And so I came in at a point in time where that pivot was beginning in a really strong way. And I have just kind of hopped onto the wave and have been riding it along. In January of 2018, I was at a conference in Florida, and it was the same week that I started. Yeah, right. It was well, I was teaching in Miami at the time, so and at the time, like Florida was rough, but like it wasn't what it is
as
today.
rough as it is now.
Yeah.
But I was at this conference, and it was the same week that I started hormones. And it was the first time that I'd ever been to a professional conference where there was a session on transgender inclusivity in choir. And attending that session opened my eyes as to what would be possible for me. That session was led by two wonderful people who I now am fortunate to call friends and colleagues, which is so weird because at the time they were like, oh my God, you guys are amazing. And you're celebrities and you're just like normal people. But Josh Pahlke, who, and Matthew Garrett, who authored the book honoring trans and gender expansive students in music education, they were presenting their research, and at the beginning of their presentation they acknowledged, like, we are cis gay men, we are not members of this community, but it is an issue that is important to us, that we want to be able to draw attention onto this until individuals who this more directly affects can kind of take the microphone and take the lead. And it is so interesting because now, like, they still present at conferences every now and then, but like at the end of their presentations they'll like plug my presentation that I'm giving or plug my research, and I'm like, it's wild. Absolutely wild. But if it wasn't for that that conference presentation that I attended, I'm not sure that I would be where I am today. And I've said that to both of them before, and they're like, oh my God, no, like you were always going to be da da da. And I was like, no, honey, I was not, but I appreciate it. So yeah, I mean, there were cis male trailblazers that started the conversation, and now that conversation is being taken over by people like myself and Melanie Stapleton and Aria Aga and Billy Sauerland just came out with a book on queering vocal pedagogy. And like, there are all of these wonderful human beings who are trans voices talking about trans issues, which is a relatively new concept in my field, which is super exciting. And I'm honored and flattered to be among them. So
wonderful. Well, this seems like a good moment for us to pause and take our break before we dig into the details of your very specific work around line recombination and all of that. I'm just going
Yeah.
to say the phrase so that chat stays for after the break. We're going to tell you about um, a new clef, a new music situation. Get your music theory nerd brains out.
Oh boy.
I'm so excited. We'll be right back.
Psst. Hey, listener. Over here. Yeah, hi. You like podcasts, right? Sure. Or you wouldn't be listening. Let me tell you about a great new show telling stories written by people who are LGBTQIA2S+. It's called Strange Stories from Odd Folks. That's with an X. And season 1 is coming. Voices by Lee, Lexi Jones, and Tracy Clifton. It's got horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and more. Do yourself a favor. Go check it out. Season 1 begins on May 10th. Go to oddfolks.podbean.com, oddfolks with an X, or search Strange Stories from Odd Folks, say it with me, with an X, wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. Stevie, I'll give you a little bit of my just personal choir story, just because I'm excited to share that with you. And then we can talk about recombination and things.
Yeah.
So I started choir when I was in high school. I was in choir for all 4 years. Senior year, they actually made a women's, like a jazz women's choir, because there were 13 women that were great and not as many guys that were great. So instead of having the top choir be mixed, like a quartet or something, they did, 13 women in this choir. And it was phenomenal. And then I was in choir all through college. And then I spent a year in a queer chorus in a big city, performing after I finished with grad school. And so I love it. And you can hear my voice now. But I was a soprano 1. And so I actually haven't been in a choir since I started HRT for 2 reasons. One, I don't know how to sing anymore. I try to sing the songs I used to sing and I can't. And so there's also this part where my brain is like, oh no, I'm used to singing like soprano, which means the melody, not the harmony. And so it's hard to switch into that, which I did spend a couple of those years as an alto. I had a broad range. So I can, somewhere in there, I have the ability to do harmony. It's harder because I can't play piano. I've tried. So I have to be in a section where somebody knows that and we'll do practices with the section and whatever. But I mean, the other thing is COVID and how to be safe during COVID. And I can tell you that singing online through Zoom is very challenging. I don't know if you have any tips for that, but
don't do it is the only tip I've got. After a year and a half of trying to do Zoom choir, if I never do it again, it'll be too soon.
Yeah, I hear that. I totally hear that. So, I don't know if the COVID concern will ever be adequately addressed for me to be in an in-person choir again, which is sad, but I can't dwell there because then I will get despondent. But
I do have access to some research studies and things like that as far as high aerosol producing activities such as singing and precautions that are taken and potential for spreading and things like that.
What are some of those precautions? I'm curious.
So, I mean, obviously distancing is a big thing, but there were a number of quote unquote singers masks that came out during COVID, where essentially the mask has a more rigid structure to allow you to inhale faster without the mask collapsing over your mouth.
That's cool.
Which really kind of facilitated a lot of choirs returning to in-person rehearsals. And in the 2 years since returning to in-person rehearsals at USC, we haven't had a single breakout. We've had individuals who got COVID, but it was not then like spread through the choir or anything. And choir was not what was it? there was that one choir in the Pacific Northwest early on in the pandemic, that a super spreader event. That's what it was called.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. I've not heard of that happening since,
Yeah.
because singers are very cognizant about it. Um, but and I don't have a lot of the figures off the top of my head, but
Okay.
I know that aerosol production combined with a higher level of herd immunity from consistent vaccination and requiring COVID vaccinations in order to participate in aerosol producing activities. Those sorts of things have really helped make it feel safe and secure. There are some singers who don't go to rehearsals masked anymore, and there's some singers who still wear N95s in rehearsal, and it's kind of all at everyone's own comfortability level. But because of the nature of how COVID is spread through like the droplets and whatnot, and it's not it's if you are masked in a singing rehearsal, the odds of transmission, to my knowledge, are infinitesimally low at this point.
What about performances? Are there any rules or guidelines about if you are or are not allowed to wear masks in performances? Because I know there's like strict, like you got to wear the right outfit. It's got to look this way.
Listen, choir uniforms is a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But
Don't get me started on sparklies. Okay.
oh my God, I can't with the sequin choir dresses. Like anyway, and the pearl necklaces. It's like can we move out of 1955, please? That'd be great.
Yeah.
But the as far as masking in a rehearsal, or in a performance, I've never encountered a performing organization since the start of COVID that says you can't wear a mask in performance. Typically, like if the ensemble, like if their attire is more like the traditional concert black, then it would just be like you need to wear a black mask, would be the only caveat. But you're pretty much invited and welcome to do pretty much whatever you're most comfortable with when it comes to wearing a mask in performance. Obviously, your face can be more emotive when this isn't the only part that is seen. But it's interesting because it's also been an exercise in like, how do we make our eyes be expressive?
So, you say that as you raise your eyebrow for those listening only.
I mean, it's been an interesting hurdle to navigate for sure. But
I'm curious if there are any disability forward choirs that require masking still. You know, like if there are members that are high risk or what have you that are just
I
like,
would
okay,
imagine that there are.
This is the deal.
I mean, I would imagine that there are. I can't think of any like off the top of my head, just because that's not where the focus of my research tends to be. But I know that ensembles that serve older populations, like community choral groups or like symphony choruses, those sorts of things, were slower to remove the mask restrictions or requirements. But I could definitely see that it would be possible that if it's a more high risk population, that they require masks in order to participate in the ensemble. But I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's fair. Thanks for talking about that piece. It's been in the back of my mind for a while.
Yeah, of course.
So what is line recombination and how does it help singers?
Line recombination. So in the first year of my doctoral study at USC, everything was on Zoom. And so rather than doing like an actual recital, we did quote unquote lecture recitals, even though the recital component wasn't there. It was mostly just the lecture. But as part of my lecture, I developed this idea of like, okay, well, we know about the gendered stereotypes of the traditional choral sections. Sopranos and altos are typically associated with women, and tenors and basses typically associated with men, despite the fact that all throughout history you have record of men singing soprano and alto in opera and in choirs and in especially the European choral tradition. And you have things like women's barbershop, where there are cis women singing tenor and and baritones. So like this gendered connotation that we have is 100% socially imposed onto the choral field. But what do we do if we have a singer who isn't comfortable? If you have a non-binary singer who's like, I don't feel comfortable in the soprano or alto section because being lumped in with the quote unquote women is weird for me, or the flip side of that, I don't feel comfortable being lumped in with tenors and basses, even though like I can sing there or whatever. And so this idea started as like, well, what do we do? Like, how could I create an experience for someone where that exists outside of this dichotomy of gendered perception of the choral sections? And then it became, okay, well, what if this outside, or what if this quote unquote voice part, for lack of a better term, is not just an opportunity for non-binary singers, but someone who's transitioning from a high voice part to a low voice part, or a low voice part to a high voice part. Like most singers can't just leapfrog into a different section and immediately be comfortable and have the technique required to be successful. And so by providing a recombined line, which is the creation of an intermediate vocal line using existing portions of the tenor and alto lines. So you're creating a line, a path rather, through the music that is in between tenor and alto, jumping between them, that doesn't add any additional musical material whatsoever. It's just creating a new path through the music that maintains a range that is statistically acceptable or accessible by most humans, and using that as a teaching tool or as a stepping stone along the way throughout their vocal transition. And so if you have someone like yourself, Meowster, who used to sing soprano 1 in choir, and then you're like, my voice can't do that anymore, what do I do? And when you have the introduction of testosterone, there's a whole bunch of layers of consideration, but fundamentally, essentially, you're going through the same vocal puberty that a 13-year-old cis boy would go through.
Yeah.
And so that means that the voice is going to be cracking a little bit. The vocal folds are going to be not depending on how old you are when you start hormones, the length of the vocal folds is not likely to change, if at all. But they will thicken, which is what results in a more round, robust sound because of how the upper harmonics are affected by more contact of the vocal folds. But that increased musculature of the vocal folds lead to a deeper sound that is typically about 60 to 70 hertz in change, which could be anywhere from like a major third to like a perfect fourth or a little wider, depending on what the starting pitch was for that individual. And so you have this pitch change that happens that for most will land their speaking pitch in a register that is typically perceived as masculine. But there are outliers that pitch change doesn't land them into that quote unquote gender neutral zone. And so then there are other acoustic phenomena that we can use to our advantage in order to masculinize the sound even more. But in music, where pitch is prescribed, it's on the page, right? So we don't have to think about like, okay, well, how do I get my speaking voice to a level that I want? It's how do I access the range that I want? And the same way that a pubescent cis boy would be going through puberty, like a choir director or a music teacher would never look at a cis boy going through puberty and being like, you know what, your voice is changing, stop singing for 2 years and then come back. Ever. But that's what they used to tell trans men, was to don't sing through the voice change. And that is the worst possible thing that you can do, because the voice is a muscle like anything else. And the less you use it, the less capable it is. And so singing is a super functional activity. And so you, by navigating those vocal speed bumps throughout the voice change, it enables the voice to stabilize faster, and to manipulate the sound in a way that is advantageous to the section that you want to sing in. So while your voice is dropping a little bit, you're also learning to manipulate the timbre or the tone color of that sound, so that it's not like it's a lower sound that still sounds like I don't actually belong here, but it has a little bit more fullness to it. Maybe there's more loft in the sound or roundness. And then on the flip side of that, if I take this same pitch and then I just bring it forward and I put a little bit of breath in it and I let it be a little bit brighter. And then if I just raise the pitch ever so slightly, all of a sudden I have a more feminine sound. But, and these are the same tenets that exist in speech therapy. But while individuals can utilize these timbral shifts, what do we do in the interim while they're figuring out how to do that? And how can we continue to include them in choir while they're figuring out how to get to the end goal, rather than just saying, hey, come back once you've reached the goal? And so that's what line recombination does. Line recombination provides an opportunity that is vocally healthy and exists in a range that facilitates the strengthening of particular aspects of the technique to set the individual up for success. So the prescribed range for my methodology is A3 to F sharp 4. So if you have middle C is right here. So A3 is just below that.
You gotta switch your Zoom.
Oh, you can't hear my piano anymore? The background noise is too loud?
I hear a little bit, yeah.
Okay, let me change it. Okay, so we have, oh, now I have to actually turn it on, I think. And boop, there we go. Can you hear now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. So this is middle C. Da. A3 is a third below that. Da. And then F sharp 4 is the F sharp above middle C. Da. And between these two pitches, da, da, between those two notes, anatomically, like the overwhelming majority of individuals will be able to sing within that range, because there are, we call them registration events that occur in that range for every voice part. You can find those registration events outlined in Richard Miller's The Structure of Singing, which is considered like the vocal pedagogy Bible. But also, I have a truncated chart in the article that I published in the Choral Journal that shows, all of those registration events as well. And I'd be happy to share that link with you guys later. It's also on my website though, which I'm sure we'll plug at some point.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
but between between those two pitches, there are notes that anyone can sing. And so by creating a line that hangs out in that range, it can help you develop the technique necessary. If you're a trans femme person or want to feminize your voice, it can help you to develop the range necessary to go higher than that eventually, versus, or not range, but the technique necessary to go higher than that. And then vice versa, it will allow someone who is singing higher to develop their chest voice a bit more, because typically someone like yourself, you are a soprano 1, so the majority of the singing that you were doing is what we call head voice or mode 2 phonation. Yeah, and so rather than da, where it's really full, it's nice, light, and floated. It's a completely different anatomical mechanism, physiological mechanism that's happening. And in that mode 2 phonation, the muscle that is responsible for chest voice, or where we speak typically, which is called mode 1 phonation, the muscle responsible for that is less engaged. And so if you're always singing in your head voice or in mode 2, that disengagement of that muscle that is responsible for mode 1, we need to strengthen that again. And so by singing in this range in a tenor register or the lower alto / tenor register, you can strengthen that muscle. It's called the thyroarytenoid muscle, and it actually accounts for 90% of the mass of the vocal folds. And so that's a significant percentage of these tiny little muscles in your larynx that create sound. And so we want to re-engage those as much as we can with someone who wants to masculinize their voice. And then vice versa, we want to allow that muscle to relax so that eventually you'll be able to just kind of float up. But I can do that same note. If I do that note, I can belt that like a tenor. Right? It's gonna be a tenory, belty, like, here's my jazz hands moment, right?
I love that.
Versus like if I take that same note, and then if I apply some similar resonance concepts to voice therapy to that same, if I want to masculinize that sound, that's a headier or a lighter mechanism, or that's going to be fuller, right? So I'm engaging
you just
more.
belted that with your chest voice.
It's going to be
amazing.
more of that TA, which is the thyroarytenoid. So more of that is engaged. But if I take that, and then I float it away, then I can go, and now all of a sudden I am accessing a particular mode of phonation that allows me to successfully sing in a register while blending in and on in the section that I want. But not all singers have the science floating around in their brain like I have inundated myself with over the last several years, or have the experience vocally and comfortability to do that just with the snap of their fingers, right? So you have to build in those techniques. And so line recombination gives you an opportunity to build in that technique in a safe, manageable range that is not going to it's not gonna stick out as it's not as likely to stick out as much as if I were an untrained voice and if I were trying to do like, that's not going to blend in a choir, right? Typically.
Right. No, it's too sharp.
Right. It's too bright. It's too pointed, but like that's the kind of sound that you would typically get from like an untrained voice, which is, in order to not do that, there are a number of things that we have to do. Right. But just jumping in and saying, okay, do X, Y, and Z on that note, and then all of a sudden it'll be more achievable, is not as easily navigable in that range. So by doing it in that A3 to F sharp 4, it allows us to, regardless of the direction that you're going, develop the vocal mechanism that is advantageous to the voice part that you might want to transition to. So basically, line recombination is the reapplication of methods that choir directors have been using for decades and decades, if not like centuries, because it is extremely common for middle school voice teachers to rewrite a voice part for changing voices, because it's like, your voices are too unstable here. Let's rewrite that, make it more manageable, or let's have you double this part here. Or in symphony choruses, it is extremely common to be like, altos, double the tenors on that line, or tenors, double the altos because that register is getting a little low, because there's already so much overlap in the ranges of these voices. And so this idea of jumping between voice parts is not new to the choral field. Applying it in this way, specifically with identified parameters, that is a new concept. And so the parameters that I've developed are the result of a lot of research and trial and error. And there are always exceptions. You know, you might have a trans person in your choir that is able to just leapfrog into the section that they want because they have the vocal capability to do it. But having a tool for those who can't just leap into where they want to be, I think is essential. And so that's why I've created this idea of line recombination, and I've codified it on my website at transitioningvoices.org, and I'm in the process of developing a recombined choral library where it can be a crowdsourced library that people can request a recombined line if they're like, I'm not comfortable creating a path through this music, or they can submit lines that they've already created in order to build this library. And so
it's like a choral GitHub.
Yeah, exactly. And so
that's so cool.
we're basically, my hope is that we will have enough repertoire there that this becomes a much more widely utilized methodology, so that choir can be as inclusive as it should be. And there are a lot of hurdles to navigate with this concept, especially when you have directors that are a bit more traditionalist in terms of what they are willing to try and what they're not. And so I've tried to kind of head them off at the pass, or whatever that phrase is, with this method, because a lot of the concern that people would have, or people tend to have, is more with trans femme voices being able to blend than trans masc voices. Because they're like, trans masc voices, like, they're not going to be able to sing as loud, is what people tend to think. And like, they're sure, stick them in that section, whatever, it's fine. Versus trans femme, it's like, once you get above that F sharp 4 into A4, B flat 4, etc., as you get up higher, it becomes harder and harder to blend. And so by addressing that through this range restriction, along with timbral recommendations and things like that, hopefully most of those concerns are alleviated. So
I really hope that high school and middle school and college choirs will engage with this line recombination work, in addition to, like, you know, the more like full-time professional choirs, right? That are like, this is our job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that like your answer to, well, what do we do with people transitioning their voices is to where I'm just going to transition to music.
Yes.
Yeah, you know,
Trans music.
it's one of those things
so
that like
good.
while I'm adapting the path through the music, I'm not changing the music at all. You know, I'm not adding any new pitches. It's just one voice or a couple of voices that are taking a slightly different path that allows them to develop the technique that is healthy for them, that is affirming for them. Because for me, like the elitism of classical music, or that the perspective of elitism that exists in classical music, is sorely lacking in acknowledging the reason why we do this stuff. Like, why do we make music? Why do we feel this need to cause this seemingly random accumulation of vibration in the air to make us feel something? Like, that's wild. And like, if you're not communicating something or you're not feeling something while creating music or bringing together people through music or communicating through music, what is the point?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so people get so caught up in chasing the perfect performance, or like everything must be like absolutely pristine in every way possible. And it's like, yeah, accurate notes and rhythms are important, but the experience of the people in the room, both the performers and the listeners, is the whole reason we're doing this. And for me, to those people that are like, oh, well, I would never let that happen in my choir because they would never sound the same. We wouldn't be able to do blah, 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 blah. And I'd be like, well,
Like
what's
how
the
you put on
point?
your man voice for that.
Yeah.
I wonder what's up with that. But like, what I say to those people is like, okay, yeah, you can chase your perfect performance, but who are you leaving out in the process?
Yeah.
And why not create an environment where, yeah, okay, it might be a little bit more work for you to help this person navigate a path through the music, but is that not worth it? Is that not part of your job as an educator and as a conductor to facilitate the optimal musical performance that is going to enhance the lives of the people in the room? Or is it to feed your own ego and get the pristine recording? Like, I will take an imperfect performance that is emotionally connected and vulnerable over a pristine, technically perfect performance that doesn't resonate with humanity in any way.
100%. I
Like,
mean, like at the end of the day, like what is the purpose of the art, right? I mean, you can create a perfect art and just lock it away in a room and where no one sees it. And then it's like, what's the point even?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, everything for me in choral music comes back to why. And I do this exercise when I was teaching public school, where on the first day of school I would come in and I would just write in giant letters the word why. And the kids would be like, what's happening? Why? What do you mean why? And I'm like, and I just look at them, why? And just kind of let the conversation be led in all sorts of directions. And eventually I steer it to why music? Why are we here? Why do we sing? Why is this important? Because if we don't collectively agree on our why, we can never effectively move forward. And for me, the why is to connect and enhance human lives. And if I can do anything to help facilitate that, I am honored to be a part of that. And as we mentioned earlier, I am bullheaded enough to not shut up about it. So, and that, I'm sure that has nothing to do with me being a double Taurus either. So,
And I think this sort of work has a lot of applications outside of choral music. Because I mean, both Meowster and I are singers, and like I don't sing in a choir, I've never have, but I sing for my own enjoyment because it brings me joy and it enriches my life.
Yeah.
And when I went from a male voice to a female voice, I found that I just wasn't able to sing as well. So
And
just
it
like,
takes
oh
time, and
yeah,
it's difficult because it's about managing expectations.
hmm
And so often as trans individuals, when we're experiencing dysphoria of some kind, whether that's related to our voice or not,
hmm
we want changes as quickly as possible to make that feeling go away.
yeah,
Um, and some changes are much slower than others, and
yeah,
it does require patience and understanding. But I can offer some small reassurance that even though the process is long, uh, finding an affirming singing voice is not impossible.
hmm
What that will look like varies greatly from person to person just because of physiological differences, but everyone can at least move in the direction of a sound that is more closely aligned with their authentic selves. And it might involve managing the expectation of like what is that ideal sound? What does that quote unquote goal look like? Um, and because if you take someone who was a bass two, the odds of them transitioning and singing in a whistle register like Mariah Carey, like we need to be realistic
yeah,
about the
yeah.
extent of the changes that can happen. Now, is
I couldn't
Mariah
even hit
Carey
Mariah Carey
manageable?
notes.
Probably not. But
Mm.
something like Cher might be. And she's a badass,
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, we
you
stand
know?
share here.
Yeah. So like the scope of quote unquote female voice is so broad, and vice
Mhm,
versa. The scope of
Yeah.
quote unquote male voice, especially if you look at pop music, most cis male pop singers or just popular
What's
singers,
that an eye roll?
they sing in an alto register.
yeah.
Yeah,
They're
they do.
they belt in an alto register.
I mean,
And
I listen to a lot of 70s prog rock and they're singing in pretty high registers.
yeah, like I mean, you look at like Steve Perry,
Mhm,
the lead singer for Journey, he unbelievable voice, unbelievable range, or Freddie Mercury.
mhm,
Like you look at these individuals who range is only a small piece of how their
mhm,
voice is perceived, but
mhm,
if any of those individuals had had a desire to be uh, perceived as a female voice, quote unquote, because they already had the range capability, they would just probably have to make some timbral adjustments and some resonance adjustments and things like that that would allow their voice to be perceived in a different way, similar to how I versus the like those are going to be two very different
mhm.
perceptions, and beyond just the fact that one is loud and soft, but the mechanism behind it does a lot of things that we don't necessarily have time for today.
Right, right.
But it all of these things contribute to the gendered perception of the voice, just as it does with voice therapy. And I think it's important if you're looking at the voice soloistically, the palette of options I think is much broader in
Mhm,
what is possible, uh, because you can develop a more individualized sound. Whereas in choir, the whole idea is that everyone blends together and everyone not adheres, but conforms to a specific sound for that section. Um, so, what I hope to do with my research is to help guide people to adapting to the ideal sound of their section in the most healthy way possible.
We have a couple of questions that are starting to roll in from the chat.
Love that.
Do you have time for a few of those today?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. This first one is a statement that I added a question to the end of. So Dr. Trifonius says, random thought, it could be as simple as rearranging the formation. Dr. Trifonius is in a choir. We usually sing women at the front, men at the back. So the tenors are slotted behind the sopranos next to the bassos. I don't know if that means basses, if that's a typo, or if bassos is a section name. So we are as far apart from the altos as we could be. So then my question that I added is, how do you physically arrange a recombined line section within a choir? Like, do you have like soprano, alto, recombined tenor, bass? Like how in the room, like what does it look like? Where do people stand? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it different over time? Like, do you train one way and then perform a different way? I don't know.
Choral formation and choral position is a topic of significant debate among choir directors as to what they prefer. I would say that particular formation where tenors are behind the sopranos is far less common than if you have a choir that is singing in sections. Typically, you'll see one of two things. You'll see soprano, alto, tenor, bass from the conductor's left to right. Or you'll have soprano, alto in the front, and then bass behind the soprano with tenor behind the bass, tenors behind the altos. And then the other thing that you might see quite frequently is soprano, bass, tenor, alto. Again, from the conductor's left to right. Because having the outer voices of soprano and bass next to each other facilitates better intonation or better tuning in the ensemble, because you have your lowest pitch and your highest pitch right next to each other. And if those two notes are in tune, it's far more likely that the notes that are in between will also be in tune. And so as far as choral formation, if you only have one singer who is utilizing line recombination or wanting to transition between sections, it often can come down to a conversation with the director of like, hey, I would like to be seated closer to this section so that when I'm singing with their part, my sound is more in line with them or whatever, or more visually and aurally connected to them. But what that looks like depends significantly on the organization in the room. And I will say that Dr. Trifonius, your choral arrangement of sopranos, tenors behind, altos, basses behind, is a bit of a hurdle, if I'm being honest. But if you took that individual and to say you have a tenor who wants to sing alto, put them in the front of the tenor section as close to the altos as possible, that could better facilitate that. Or if the individual is really confident holding their part, put them in the alto section. You know, if it's an individual who is an independent musician and is capable, then like for me, when I was singing recombined lines at USC, I sat right behind the alto section, still in the tenor section, because I was predominantly singing tenor. But when there were some songs where I was almost 100% on the alto line, I would move for that song into the alto section. Or you can put someone like right on the dividing line between the sections so that when they're singing with one, they're over there. When they're singing with the other, they're over here. Or if visually they want to be included in the alto section or in the tenor section or whichever, basically what I'm getting at is the palette for vocal arrangement in a choir is kind of infinite and largely dependent on the comfortability and independence of the singer as well as the director's willingness to break away from their preconceived conventions if those conventions are not facilitating as inclusive an environment as they could be.
Can you imagine a choir where there are enough people who need line recombination that there's a fifth section, or an all trans choir that everyone's singing recombined lines?
Well, if everyone's singing recombined lines, you're gonna only have one line through the thing. Trans choirs do exist. There's the Trans Chorus of LA, which is probably the most famous trans chorus in the country. There's another one, I think, in Boston called the Butterfly Choir or Butterfly Ensemble or something. I'm not entirely sure. But trans choirs do exist. They are not super common and they are usually more community focused. And what the voice parts in those choirs tend to look like vary greatly. It all comes down to vocal capability and a comfortable experience for the singers. So if I'm voicing an ensemble, whether there's trans singers in it or not, and I need to cover 5 different parts, I'm going to divide those parts in whatever way is most advantageous with the singers who are most capable of singing those 5 parts. You know, for me, I think about my voicings of my ensembles far less as soprano, alto, tenor, bass, because there are such gendered connotations with those words. And in choir, contrary opinion, those words mean nothing. Soprano and alto and tenor and bass are words that were applied to choral situations that were taken out of solo music. There's a voice classification system called the Fach system of classification that is common in Germany, and we use a similar one here in the States. And it basically divides voices by capability, timbre, and divides roles in opera, specifically with the Fach system, based on character traits of the types of voices that would sing those or whatever. But these ideas of soprano, alto, tenor, bass in a choir mean almost nothing, because I can't tell you how many high school baritones end up singing tenor just because they're the only ones that can sing above middle C, or how many sopranos with big voices end up singing alto because in the soprano section they stick out, or how many sopranos end up singing alto because they can read music, and they don't just have to sing the melody all the time.
Such a mood.
Or like there rarely ever is someone singing in a choir. Well, maybe not rarely ever, that's a strong statement, but it is not uncommon in choir for a significant number of people in the ensemble to be singing in a voice part that is not their quote unquote voice classification. So I get away from that and I just think of it like, okay, this is this piece. These are the highest voices that will sing this part, this part, this part, this part, this part. I think of it as like part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, however many there are. And I'll still use the words soprano, alto, tenor, bass because that's what the ensemble is used to, but I don't think of it in terms of soprano, alto, tenor, bass because really those words in choir are kind of meaningless. But as far as what sections might look like in a trans choir, for me, it would be whatever best serves and highlights the voices in the ensemble.
We have another question from the Twitch chat. So Gigi's in chat asks, my goal is to just sound more feminine and less like a frat boy when I belt out my shanties. Would you have any tips to sing feminine, or for those of us who are trans masc, any tips to sing masculine?
Yeah, I have a lot actually. Again, limited on time probably, but some general concepts to cling on to would be resonance and that can mean a very, very wide range of things. But essentially, if I'm being like stereotypical Western Eurocentric American vocal technique and gendered perception expectations. So this is very much a cis white lens that I am providing this answer, because if we broaden it beyond into many other different cultures, those criteria become very just too much variation, to be honest, to give you like a concise answer. So a stereotypical American feminine voice is going to be brighter. It's going to usually have the perception of breathiness. Notice I did not say breathiness, the perception of breathiness, which basically what that boils down to is that the vocal folds are not as tightly pushed together. So in order to belt, the vocal folds, the TA, the thyroarytenoid that we were talking about earlier, has a lot of engagement, and there's a lot of surface area touching. My fists are the vocal folds, in case you're wondering. I'm not just doing a power pose. And then when similar to the way that T thickens the vocal folds and results in a more masculine sound, if we lessen the contact of those folds by not forcing the folds together, and there are specific exercises that can help to relax that contact, it will result in a more feminine sound, theoretically. Now, these are all things that are best done in collaboration with a voice teacher or a speech language pathologist who's familiar with the singing voice. But I will tell you right now that the amount of research in this area is minuscule. I am actually in the process of working on a publication of my own that will address the specific issue and this specific question, actually. But in order to make the sound brighter, there are a couple of things that you can do. You can spread the position of your lips, and you can raise the position of your tongue. On the flip side of that, you can make the sound darker by rounding your lips and lowering the tongue. Now, you don't want to actively push the tongue down, because then that pushes the larynx down, creating what we call a depressed larynx, and then there's extra tension. So all of this is a delicate balance of different physiological mechanisms in order to make the finest of adjustments that change the sound. So if I take that, if I take a note here, that's like kind of middle high for me, just and if I relax, or let me go from the stronger version. So if I belt that, I need to turn the musician thing back on.
Good memory.
Thank you. Okay, so if I have, if I sing that note and I belt it, that's lots of chest voice, right? The vocal folds are slammed together. But if I take that same sound, and I relax that muscularity, and then I make it brighter, now all of a sudden we're tiptoeing toward Ethel Merman a little bit. And so you have to have a delicate balance of those structures, but the changes that I'm making are not they're not drastic. They're very small. And so if I take that and I make it an E, so in voice therapy, there's this concept of eification, where you essentially, in terms of feminizing the voice, where you color all of your vowels with E. And if I go, and then I try and put my ah in more of an E place. So I have that's going to be a different sound than if I do right? One has E in it, one does not. I don't know.
There's a lot of estrogen jokes in the chat right now.
I'm trying. I love that. I'm trying to be as concise as I can while also acknowledging like the science behind what's happening. But then on the flip side,
everyone's excited.
On the flip side, for masculinizing the voice, you would take that same concept. So someone who is AFAB and is singing in their head voice is most likely going to be singing you just increase the muscularity, slam those vocal folds together, increase the subglottal pressure with the air below the vocal folds, and then all of a sudden you have a more robust sound. And typically masculine sound is going to be darker. Typically, not always. I'm looking at you, Adam Levine, but
shots fired. Wow. No, this is all sounding very familiar from all the time that I spent in speech therapy. So
well, that's good. That's validation for me, and I need that.
Yeah, because like obviously, like I wasn't being told how to sing. I was just feminizing my voice. But a lot of the same concepts apply. So
very much so.
I think you just said it's like, yeah, no, I did that, and I did that.
Yep. Yeah. So that's actually what so line recombination is one wing of my research, and then like the vocal pedagogy or the science of teaching the singing voice is another wing of my research that I'm more actively digging into at the moment. And while there are general guidelines for like, okay, here are the ideas that we think will help facilitate a gender affirming singing voice, there are no concrete studies done for trans feminine singing voices at all. Zero. And so that's something that a lot of voice teachers are afraid of because there's no research out there, and there's no research in teaching someone how to sing in what we would refer to in Western classical music as countertenor, which is an AMAB, a cis AMAB singing in a soprano or alto register. There's really no pedagogy out there for that either, which is fascinating because countertenors have been around for centuries. I'm in the process of truncating a lot of these different ideas from speech language pathology, from vocal pedagogy, and from tradition with countertenor voices and pubescent changing voices or lowering voices. I'm in the process of truncating all of that into some foundational concepts that people can then develop an actual practice protocol to strengthen specific mechanisms in order to eventually work in the direction of the sound that they want. Because this is not something that you can just snap a finger and then habitually it will be fixed forever. So
only you could.
If only you could. I can make all these manipulations momentarily, but like I don't do them frequently enough that becomes my habit. Because I've consciously made the decision not to do voice therapy of any kind because I want to maintain functionality of the extent of my range as a choir director. Because it's fun to be able to look at the basses and sing their line better than them. And I'm like, hey, what the heck? Like, I'm a tenor. Step it up, man. Let's go. But
that's my favorite.
But then on the flip side, like I can model for altos and sopranos generally okay. But it's not something that I've built in habitually, even though I know the adjustments that need to be made. It takes a lot more than just doing it once for it to be muscle memory.
Oh, you don't need to tell me that.
I know. This is more for just any casual listener.
Yeah, exactly. So for context, like one of the reasons I started streaming on Twitch was to practice my voice because I was spending a lot of money on speech therapy and I wasn't practicing. So I was like,
How
well,
many times did you read that rainbow passage?
I had another thing that I was reading.
You didn't do the rainbow passage?
I don't think so.
I feel like that's the rite of passage.
Wow.
Right? Yeah.
Getting to the end of the rainbow and all that
Wow.
crap. I don't know. Okay, do we have any other questions that need to be addressed?
Yeah. We have another one from the chat. It's from Keemsy with Miramis wording, so we'll say it's from both of them.
Okay.
Do you have any resources you would recommend or like to share with people who are interested in singing through transitions?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Stevie's website is a great place to start.
So my first recommendation would be my website, transitioningvoices.org, which will have the line recombination and also links to additional resources for different things. That website at the moment is far more choral focused than solo voice focused. But then I would highly recommend this book, Queering Vocal Pedagogy by William Sauerland. William goes by Billy, but I think professionally he's William. But this is one of the best current resources for queering vocal pedagogy. It has a couple of case studies in here. There's not a lot of the science behind the exercises that are included in the book, because it is more of like a narrative style case study, but it's an extremely valuable resource. And then this one is more general, Honoring Trans and Gender Expansive Students in Music Education by Matthew Garrett and Josh Pahlke. I very much highly recommend that one as well. This one talks about things like choral positioning and uniforms and other things like that. One of the books that was really integral for me in my research has been this, which is the Speech Language Pathology Gender Affirming Therapy Bible, basically. It's the Voice and Communication Therapy for the Transgender, Gender Diverse Client, a Comprehensive Clinical Guide, 3rd edition, edited by Richard Adler, Sandy Hirsch, and Jack Pickering. But there's a chapter in here specifically for the singing voice. So this is far more clinical. It's a book that like SLPs or speech language pathologists would actually probably study if they're doing gender affirming therapy. But for the lay person, someone who's looking to just learn more about their voice in general, chapter 14 of that book, The Singing Voice, by Anita Kozan, with a brief aside by Sandra Hammond talking about this is the Butterfly Choir. Because Sandra Hammond is the director of that, and I want to make sure. It's the Butterfly Music Transgender Chorus in Boston, Massachusetts. But this chapter like changed my life. Never have I read an academic textbook and cried. I cried reading that chapter.
Wow, that's an achievement unlocked right there.
Yeah, like I got to the end of that chapter, and is it okay if I read an excerpt?
Please do.
Yeah, really quick. So Anita Kozan, the author of the chapter, talks about a personal communication that she had with a trans individual, and in her discussion of it, she says, transgender clients have spent their lives trying to be who they are not, trying to act and talk like their gender assigned at birth. Trans women are often still stiff, not easily moving their face or body, not opening their mouths, and not showing emotion. They have often shared that they were worried while growing up that they would be perceived as being effeminate or gay and would be bullied, so they refrained from any movements or gestures that they thought would make them suspect. Trans men talked of literally living in bodies bound with binders and bandages to keep their upper chests from moving, experiencing physical as well as psychological pain, with some experiencing physical injury, being unable to breathe diaphragmatically because of the ribs being so tightly bound, forcing themselves to use clavicular breathing with shoulders elevated and tense, and with neck tension and laryngeal strain. Being forced by society to live your life by being who you are not is a terrible burden. It includes excruciating repetition of so many behaviors and habits that have been learned in order to survive because the person's life did depend on it. There is little that is intuitively obvious in becoming who we truly are, especially when we have worked so hard to be who we were not. If you're reading this chapter because of your own personal journey, be gentle with yourself and respectful of all the work involved in the many changes you are undertaking. You are stronger now than you have ever been and will become even stronger in the months and years ahead. If you're reading this chapter for professional knowledge, know how important your work is in helping people find their true voice. We're helping to give voice to some tender and incredibly strong, courageous individuals whose voices have been silenced for far too long. Like, ma'am.
That's powerful stuff right there.
Yeah, it just,
I'm not gonna lie, I did start tearing up a little bit.
It like that book. I mean, it's literally a science book. Like,
yeah, this person gets it.
It's that book is full of so much anatomy and physiology that it's like, it's not geared toward an emotive read. But I love that she addresses the why this is important at the end. And like, I was reading that and I was like, that is me. Oh my God. And it's weird because like, I'm on both sides of that coin. If you're reading that for yourself and you're reading it for as like a professional thing, like I was on both sides of that coin and I'm like, why is it always me? But yeah, it absolutely amazing. I highly recommend those books if you're looking for resources on singing. There's another one. I have a digital version of it. I have so many books. Actually, I'm just gonna pull up my bibliography from.
I'm actually tearing up.
So there's a book called The Voice Book for Trans and Non-Binary People, a practical guide to creating and sustaining authentic voice and communication. That one is by Matthew Mills and Jilly Stoneham. And that book, it's speech therapy focused, but there are some tenets in there that can be applied to singing. And it's not written for the clinician. It's written for the person who might not be able to afford going to therapy on their own, or is wanting to supplement their therapy with research of their own. Excellent resource. Highly recommend that one. Let me glance through my bibliography a little bit more and see if there's anything else that I'm leaving out that are initial resources. Yeah, there's one book by Liz Hearns and Brian Kramer called The Singing Teacher's Guide to Transgender Voices. There are a lot of things that are pretty good in that book. It references quite a bit more the Kozan and then the other books that I've already referred you to, but if I'm being critical, it's lacking in like exercises that one can do, or the science behind the exercise. It's really just like, hey, here's an idea, here's a thing. Instead of like, here's the idea, this is why that idea is good, and then here's the thing. But Billy's book, the Queering Vocal Pedagogy, like I can't recommend that one enough. That's a great one as well. I could go on and on and on and on, but yeah.
The show notes for this might be the longest bibliography we've ever had.
I can send you a legit, like I got like 50 pages of bibliography on my end, so I'm happy to share.
Leave it to a doctorate student, right?
Right, right. We've already we've shouted out many people so far. Is there anyone else that we wanted to give a shout out to that's doing similar work to build inclusive communities and choirs that we should know about?
Yeah.
And are there any tips on finding a trans-friendly vocal coach or singing lessons?
Trans-friendly vocal coach or singing lessons. I mean, it largely depends on the individual's location if they're looking for something in person. But if anyone wants to reach out to me through my website, I'm happy to refer them to some people that I know, or connect them to. I am in a couple of different like groups on social media that have trans voice educators and things like that that I could just throw in, be like, hey, someone's looking for X, Y, and Z. Is anybody interested? I'm happy to help connect there. As far as other people to shout out, so I'm gonna recap like the significant people in the choral field that I've already mentioned. There's William Sauerland, who is absolutely amazing. Wrote Queering Vocal Pedagogy. Matthew Garrett and Josh Palkey, Palkki. They are the authors of the Honoring Transgender and Gender Expansive Students in Music Education. And they're cis gay men, but they have a very wide network of people that can connect to others. Then Melanie Stapleton, who's a PhD student in music education at Northwestern. She does a lot of similar research to what I do. And her website, I think, is called Beyond the Binary. Let me make sure of that before I double down. Beyond the Binary. Let's see. And then, yes, it is Beyond the Binary, I think is her website. And then she talks a lot about like choral placement and uniforms and things like that. Ari Aga, I'm not 100% sure on how to pronounce his last name, but it's Ari is the first name, and then Aga, Agha. And he has done a lot of stuff with trans mask voices as well. And there's, oh shoot, his first name is leaving me. Let me make sure I get, Alexandros Constantis. He was the first one to publish a study on trans masculine singing voices.
Nice.
And is a leading voice in that area, specifically on the effects of tea on the singing voice. I would also highly recommend Jace Saplan, Jaseplan. Jace Saplan is the director of choral activities at Arizona State University, and they are probably the leading figure in America on decolonizing choral music education, both from a gender and cultural perspective. They're Hawaiian, and they do a lot of work with indigenous communities and just really creating a space to honor and celebrate joy in through lenses that are not stuck in the very Western European focus.
See, I want to hear a whole choir sing a song in Losha.
I'm sure we could find one for you. Let's see. I want to make sure that I'm getting everybody. I'm glancing through my stuff one last time. If you're interested in SLP related stuff, Felicia Francois is a colleague of mine at USC. She's absolutely amazing. Another one, Adam Lloyd, is an SLP based in Miami. He is he's a part of a vocology association that is very SLP heavy, but Adam also works with the Florida Grand Opera there in Miami and is a brilliant speech language pathologist. So many people.
Mhm.
I am gonna, I think, stop waxing poetic on names there because I feel like I'm overloading at this point. But again, anyone can also reach out to me on my website, transitioningvoices.org, and I'm happy to point them in the direction of additional resources or help find a solution for any questions that they might have.
That's so wonderful, Stevie. Well, I'm going to ask you a little more about your website when we get to the cross promo in a few moments. But is there anything that we missed about the topic of inclusivity in choral music that you'd like to make sure you say? Like, if this is your soapbox moment, they only hear 30 seconds from you. What do you want to make sure people hear from you?
Sorry, I just had a brainwave. Melanie Stapleton's website is blurring the binary, not beyond the binary. That might actually come up correctly. Yes, it is blurring the binary is her website. That's not my 30-second splurge, though. My personal perspective is that choral music is an opportunity for individuals of all backgrounds, all experiences, and all cultures to connect with one another, to become a part of something bigger than themselves, and to communicate through the oldest method of music making, and that is singing.
Mhm.
And in order for that experience to be as authentically human as possible, it is the responsibility of singers, of music educators, of conductors, of anyone involved in that process to broaden their understanding or broaden their preconceptions of what is music of value, of what is inherently human and worthy of respect. And that is inclusive of variety of gender identities, vocal identities, cultural identities, racial identities. And if we are not doing everything that we can to facilitate that environment, we are doing our singers a disservice. We are doing ourselves a disservice. And in my opinion, the music is not as human as it could be. I know that wasn't 30 seconds, but
It's fine. No, I love that so much. And especially like in the times that we're living in, trans joy has never been more important. So can you maybe share an experience that you've had with gender euphoria?
So many at this point, which is weird to say.
Yeah.
That's great, though.
Yeah, I think I'll limit my response to my choral experiences. Anytime that I have an opportunity to sing with the altos or be included amongst the altos, or to conduct in a woman's suit or in a dress, it's not just gender euphoria, it's professional validation that I am able to be my authentic self and express myself in an authentic way in those contexts. And it's such an empowering feeling to, like, I mean, I felt powerful before I was what I thought was a cis white man. I'd felt powerful before.
Mhm.
But it felt like a manufactured power.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And now when I feel powerful, I feel authentic. I feel powerful because I am authentic. And I am very much unapologetically myself. And I'm bullheaded enough to push back against anyone who begs to differ. And it's honestly gender euphoric to see my research being well received and to connect with so many professional colleagues and friends and be at conferences and strangers come up to me and they're like, oh my God, I loved your session. Or I was on your website the other day and I'm like, I don't even know who you are. This is so wild. And like, it's not just surreal from a recognition standpoint. It's surreal from the only reason I'm getting this recognition is because I was authentic in pursuing the research that was important to me as a human. And I'm going to keep trying to do that.
Hey, don't let anyone stop you.
I'm doing my best.
Oh my gosh. Kimsey says, what a beautiful merging of self. Gigi says, please do. Mirmi says, hell yeah. It's just a lot of positivity in the chat. Stevie, last question. What would you like to make sure folks know about your perspective on gender and non-binary, trans, and gender diverse issues? Doesn't have to be choral related, but just in general, what do you want your closing thoughts to be?
I wish that more people would embrace realities outside of their own. The anti-trans legislation and the pushback that we're seeing in our country or in the United States right now is the result of a lack of education into the validity of trans existence. And as the trans community, it is exhausting. It is exhausting to turn on the news every day and hear more about people pushing against us. But it may take a while, but love always wins. You know, it's one of those things we sometimes take one step forward, 3 steps back, sometimes 3 steps forward and 2.5 steps back. But the net direction is forward. And there is hope in that. There is love in that. And the more we band together and don't bend to the hate, the stronger we will be, even if that strength comes at the unfortunate reality of what is hopefully a temporary lack of safety. So my thoughts on trans and gender diverse issues are that we are valid, that trans people have existed since the beginning of humanity, and we're not going anywhere, no matter how much they try to erase us.
Oh yeah. So I actually have a bonus question.
Great.
You may either love me or hate me for asking this question.
Great. I love a polarizing bonus question.
Yes. How do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Oh, geez. Practice. You know, the funny thing about that, when I was singing at Carnegie Hall, was that 2 weeks, week and a half ago? And a friend of mine was playing organ with the orchestra for our performance. And he was not given any practice time on the organ before the performance. Literally in our sound check before the performance, he's like trying to go through stops and playing on the organ, like trying to get a feel for the instrument. And so we were joking, like, how do you play on Carnegie Hall? And he's like, just show up. But yeah, no, I mean, it's one of those things. Like, I've been fortunate to be invited to conduct at Carnegie Hall. My debut was now pushed to 2025, unfortunately, just because of a couple of admin things. But I've been honored to be invited to conduct. Jace Saplan actually just conducted this past weekend at Carnegie. And I think in terms of looking forward in the field, the way to get to Carnegie is to make a difference.
Yeah. Well,
if I want to go outside of the stereotypical practice.
Yes. Well, I saw that you were going to be conducting at Carnegie Hall. So if we have any listeners that are going to be in the area, be sure to check out Stevie.
Yeah.
So it looks like you still have signups for people to be in your choir for Carnegie Hall.
I do. The production is being produced. All right, that was a terrible sentence. The performance is being produced by a company called Mid America Productions. And if you just Google Mid America Productions and then look through their concert series, they may have updated their website. You might not be able to sign up for my session anymore because it got postponed to 2025 instead of next year. Which is what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be June 1st next year. But it is going to happen. And if you are interested and you're struggling to find the instructions on how to sign up, please just reach out to me through my website. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have and add you to my email list so that once we do start staffing that choir for my performance, again, then I can make sure that any of you are included, because I would love to have any and all of you talking to my lovely co-hosts here today also to come and sing with me, because anyone can do it. And I don't care about your vocal experience or what range you sing either. To me, it's about getting together and making music and celebrating each other. And anyone can do that regardless of where you are, and we'll do what we need to do to make it the best that we can.
Love that. That's amazing. Now I'm getting misty.
Aw.
Yay. You're getting meowsty.
There you go. Atta girl. We love puns so much. We have a pun emote on this channel.
Amazing. I love that.
Stevie, this has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Miranda, thank you so much for being my co-host today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It's been wonderful. Y'all, primarily a choral conductor, Stevie J. Hirner, she, her, hers, is also an active vocalist, composer, and arranger of choral music. As a transgender musician, she's currently pursuing her doctorate in choral music at USC, University of Southern California, and her research on transgender inclusivity is gaining international attention after presenting it at multiple universities and professional conferences in the United States. Go to www.transitioningvoices.org for more information. Included on that website, as we've been mentioning through, is both the RCL library, the Line Recombination library, and methodology resources. You can also see a little bit of info there about Carnegie Hall. We'll probably have to get the dates updated, but the graphic design is beautiful. I love you with your conducting stick and your hair's blowing in the breeze. It's wonderful. So do check out Stevie's website. There is an email sign up you can do to get more information in an ongoing way. from Stevie. We love a mailing list. So folks, take a moment and go put your name on that mailing list. And Stevie's phone number and email are listed on the website, but I'm going to make you go to the website to find it and not say it in the podcast. Because it could change between now and the time. Who knows? I mean, you know, it is a gorgeous image. I agree. Is there anything else you want to mention about your website, Stevie, before we wander off?
Yeah, if you would like to get involved in the RCL, the Recombined Choral Library, whether that's through creating recombined lines, requesting a recombined line, or being a part of the team to help facilitate the creation of recombined lines, please indicate that interest as well. I want to build a network, not just of people who are utilizing the resource, but also of people who are interested in contributing in whatever way that they are able. And if you have any ideas of how we might be able to take this idea further or anything like that, I'm always looking for thought partners in the development of my platforms. So reach out. I'm a human. Just come talk to me. Like I'm too like, everything's too surreal for me to be like, oh, that is beneath me. Just reach out to me. It's gonna be fine. Like, yeah.
I love that. Folks, you can also find Stevie on Instagram at transitioning_voices or on LinkedIn, Stevie J Hirner. And I posted both of those in the chat for folks. Now, here's this week's Clouder query that you, our audience, can answer on our social media platforms.
How can you contribute to building inclusive communities in choirs and in society at large?
I love that. Thank you, Stevie. So everyone, next week's guest is going to be Maya Brave, and we are discussing cosplay and drag. I'm very excited for that. Other community updates, NASATAC, Miranda, and I are going to be at Trans Pride Seattle the fourth Friday in June. I think it's in Volunteer Park this year. We'll be tabling. Hopefully my wheelchair will exist in my life by then, so you can come say hi to me in my chair.
If not,
we'll be
I'll
there
just carry
with a third. Oh man, my wife tried that and she hurt her back.
Well, I don't know. I go to the gym. I do weight training. I work out. I'm strong.
You do. Oh man, she hasn't been working out in the last few years.
Speaking of working out, if anyone is ever in LA and wants to take an aerial silks class by yours truly, I also am an aerial silks instructor.
I don't know what that is, but I'm interested.
Aerial silks, go to my aerial Instagram, stevie.silks, and check it out.
Oh my God. All the things. Now we need a second show about being trans in circus performing.
There we go. Ooh, I bet you there's like a very rich history in that. That could be really interesting, actually.
Yeah,
we should make a panel.
Yeah.
I love that. So amazing. So yeah, so Miranda and I will be at Trans Pride Seattle. I'm sure there's other stuff that's coming up. My Streamiversary is next month, July 2023. I don't remember the date. It's either Tuesday or Wednesday, and we're going to have some sort of special event that I haven't finished planning. So if you'd like to show up for my 3 years on Twitch Streamiversary, I do know that we're going to be revealing our new logo. That's the one thing I know because it's done, and I've intentionally not shared it so I can release it on our 3-year anniversary. So yeah, so that's our community updates for the talk show. Thank you again, Stevie and Miranda, and see everybody next week. Genderful would like to thank our guest for being on this podcast. If you'd like to catch us live, join us on Mondays at twitch.tv/GenderMeowster. Show notes will appear in the edited version of the show on Fridays on both YouTube and podcasting platforms.
If you have a question you would like the host to answer or are gender diverse and would like to request an interview, please send an email to genderfulpodcast@gmail.com or sign up via the website at genderfulpodcast.com.
As a gender diverse community, the Clouder wants to assure our listeners that we are prepared to moderate our spaces. We will get positive and negative feedback on these shows and topics, and we have a moderation team on our channels, socials, and Discord server ready to deal with this.
please join our Discord server at discord.gg/Meowster to meet the community and get a regular digest of Solidarity resources. You can also support us with subscriptions on Patreon, following and reviewing us on your favorite podcasting platform, or engaging with our posts and content on social media at GenderfulPod and at GenderMeowster.
You could take a few moments to also rate the show. We will post any 5-star reviews on our socials, so get creative. Mention a special interest of your own, a project you're working on, or even say hi to your comfort person in your review. What power!
This show is made possible by volunteers, tips, and subscriptions. Shout out to the folks helping us coordinate guests, edit the podcast, moderate the live chat, and post on our socials.
Artist credit for Genderful. Genderful's theme song is called Hope by Free Range Megs, aka Soma. The GenderMeowster logo was designed by That's Barnaby and edited with consent by Transgriffin. Genderful's pre-show is wrangled by JuiceTex. Genderful is edited and mixed by Transgriffin and Alexis Fandom. Genderful's social media is managed by Queer to Help. Genderful is hosted by Atlas O Phoenix and GenderMeowster. Genderful is the intellectual property of GenderMeowster. All rights reserved.
Trans rights are human rights. That's right.